In 1937, the world clung to the fragile illusion of peace. Europe's diplomats toasted treaties already rotting at their edges. Newspapers insisted that the last war had taught humanity its lesson. Politicians, always eager to believe in calm, declared that no nation would ever again stain the century with conquest. And while they congratulated themselves in warm offices and well-lit halls, the true fault line of disaster lay thousands of miles away, across deserts, mountain ranges, and oceans, where a single railway track stitched its way across the fractured body of northern China. It was called the Meridian Line. The line ran like a scar across the land, through abandoned fields where farmers had fled warlords, through cities that had already burned once in the last decade, through border zones where soldiers stared at each other across trenches dug into frozen dirt. Every night the locomotives groaned along the rails, carrying coal, lumber, grain, and secrets. Always secrets. At the southern station on the line worked Lian Zhao, senior telegraph operator, a man whose life had been shaped, then defined, by listening. He was tall, quiet, with the patient posture of someone who spent more time with machines than people. Yet, he was no mere technician. The line's entire intelligence network moved through his hands. Military traffic, civilian reports, rumors disguised as logistical updates, and every once in a while, a coded heartbeat of something darker. An omission, an odd gap in a transmission, a phrase that did not belong. Leon had learned long ago that silence on a wire could be more dangerous than the loudest message. The July rains came early that year, swelling the rivers and turning the rail embankments into mud. On the night everything changed, lightning flickered across the horizon like distant artillery fire. The telegraph room smelled of damp wood and hot metal. Leon was alone. He always volunteered for the night shift. The quiet made patterns easier to hear. At 2:08 a.m., a signal arrived. Not unusual at first, just a clipped, formal transmission from a Japanese relay station in Manchuria, nothing unheard of. But the timing was wrong, and the frequency, and the speed. 3 tiny irregularities that most operators would never notice. Leon straightened, adjusted his headphones, and scribbled the incoming text, letter by letter. The message was short. Too short. Then came the final line, the one that froze him. Operation Seiryu. Initiate at dawn. No context, no explanation, no coded coordinates, just a name, Seiryu, the Azure Dragon, and a pulse of impending violence. Leon sent the message up the chain, to the Beijing office, to the provincial command, even to a British advisory desk that had once expressed interest in Japanese signals. He expected the usual panic, or at least urgency. But replies trickled back with indifference. Unverified. Possibly routine exercise. Do not provoke diplomatic tension. Japan will not expand further. Leon removed his headphones and stared at the silent machine, as if it were expecting to argue on his behalf. Outside, rain hammered the station roof. The world slept through its final hours of peace, and then at dawn, the world awoke to fire. The Japanese assault, later known as the beginning of a new nightmare, struck with precision that made generals whisper about premonition. Garrisons fell in minutes. Bridges detonated under retreating forces. Entire communication nodes went silent. What had seemed like scattered clashes were revealed as one vast synchronized blow. The Meridian Line itself trembled as troop trains roared south, their black smoke trailing like serpents. But the assault was not the strangest part. What followed in the days after were the disappearances. At first, it was a few villages. Gone. Not burned, not shelled, just empty. Leon received reports from desperate station masters. Freight cars passing in the night with no manifests, guards who refused inspection, entire convoys rerouted under mysterious authority. A week later, farmers near the border claimed whole families had vanished, their livestock tethered, their meals still warm, their doors open as if someone had stepped out and never returned. The provincial government dismissed the reports as wartime confusion. Lian knew better. He had catalogued anomalies for years, minor oddities that never formed a pattern, until now. He returned to the intercepted Operation Seryu and reread it. The brevity, the timing, the secrecy. It was not a battle plan. It was a program. Something ongoing, something concealed, something with civilian targets. His guilt grew with every unheeded message he transmitted. Then came the night the freight manifest arrived. It was a routine coal shipment on the Meridian line, except for one car. Car 11B, marked as maintenance equipment, sealed with fresh welds. He checked prior logs. 11B did not exist. Not last month. Not last year. Not ever. That same night, a junior operator whispered to him that soldiers had escorted several dozen civilians onto a train earlier that week, none of whom had been seen again. Lian's hands shook for the first time in years. He made a decision he knew was irrational, dangerous, possibly suicidal. He would board the next train carrying Car 11B and see for himself what was happening. Not as a soldier, not as a spy, but as a witness. The train arrived near midnight. Rain sheeted off its sides. The engine hissed like something alive and impatient. Lian slipped into a dark maintenance compartment, unseen. For hours the train climbed north, deeper into Japanese-held territory. The rhythm of wheels on track became a heartbeat, a warning. Finally, near the border zone, the train slowed. Soldiers patrolled the exterior, their boots thudding on metal. Lian slipped from his hiding place and crept toward the sealed car. The welds gleamed fresh under his lantern. He held his breath. Tap. He froze. Tap, tap. Tap, 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 tap. It wasn't the train. It was Morse code. Someone, or something, inside the sealed steel compartment was signaling. The rhythm was shaky, uneven, but unmistakable. Lian pressed his ear to the cold metal and decoded the faint taps. Witness. He felt the hairs rise on his arms. He tried to pry at the welds with his lantern hook, but before he could open even a sliver, shouts erupted outside. Soldiers. Flashlights swept the corridor. Someone had discovered the unauthorized presence. Lian fled. He ran through the car, into the next, stumbling over crates. A rifle bolt clacked behind him. Bullets sparked against metal. He leapt from the moving train into mud and darkness. The fall knocked the breath out of his lungs. He scrambled up and ran into the trees, rain blurring the world into streaks of silver. He would have died there, hunted and unarmed, if a hand had not grabbed his coat and yanked him behind a fallen log. Quiet, a woman whispered in accented Chinese. Her name was Anastasia Volkov, and she was not supposed to exist, not officially, not on any diplomatic roster. She had been monitoring Japanese research activities in the region for months, using ruined farmhouses and abandoned quarries as listening posts. Her job, she claimed, was to gather proof of atrocities that foreign governments already suspected but did not want confirmed. She brought Lian to a safe house, a cellar beneath a collapsed factory, where the smell of oil mingled with damp earth. Lanterns cast trembling light across maps pinned to the walls. Anastasia showed him what she had collected. Grainy photographs of emaciated villagers dragged into trucks. Documents referring to unit facilities. Testimonies written in trembling handwriting. Medical diagrams marked with coded symbols. All connected to one operation, Seryu. Lian felt sick. His intercepted messages were not warnings of war, they were warnings of something worse. industrialized experimentation, forced human displacement, entire communities relocated with no return. "Why hasn't the world acted?" he asked. Anastasia gave a hollow smile. "Because the world always moves, only when the smoke reaches its own windows." From that moment, Leon became more than a telegraph operator. He became a courier of truth. He memorized coded phrases, smuggled microfilm inside hollowed-out telegraph keys, carried testimonies sewn into his clothing. He traveled with resistance groups, crossed ravines at night, evaded patrols, lost comrades whose names he never learned. Once he transmitted a message from a sabotaged rail tower, typing with bloodied fingers while Japanese soldiers smashed. Leon did not expect to return to the Meridian Line again after that day. He had planned to spend the rest of his life blending back into the anonymity from which he had been torn, repairing radios, perhaps, or teaching young recruits how to read coded rhythms without losing their minds. But the world had other plans. The war had ended, but the ashes it left behind had not settled, and there were still questions that gnawed at him, questions he could not ignore, no matter how deeply he wanted the past to stay buried. In the months after Japan's surrender, rumors began to ripple through the fractured provinces. Sealed bunkers discovered in remote valleys, documents burned only halfway, laboratories where the walls still smelled of chemical solvents. Some whispered that Seiryū had not been dismantled, but abandoned, left to rot, or left to be found. And somewhere in those whispers, one truth kept returning like a persistent echo. Not everyone involved in Seiryū had been captured. Some had vanished behind a fog of false identities, bribed officials, and diplomats who preferred secrets to justice. Leon tried to ignore the rumors, but then a letter arrived. No address, no name, only a thin sheet of paper folded with surgical precision. Inside was a single line written in perfect Morse. "The dragon breathes still." He felt his skin crawl. Only 3 people had ever used that phrasing: himself, Anastasia Volkov, and the unknown survivor trapped inside Car 11B. Leon studied the dots and dashes again, searching for any mistake, but the letters were unmistakably deliberate. At the bottom of the page was a set of coordinates: northern mountains, unmapped terrain, a place even the new authorities rarely entered because the land still held mines beneath its soil and ghosts in its trees. Against every rational instinct, Leon went. He traveled as inconspicuously as possible, carrying little more than a satchel of tools, a ration tin, and his old telegraph key. Polished, repaired, but still bearing the small dent from the night he'd used it to wedge open a jammed hatch. The journey north took days. Roads had been obliterated by bombardments, leaving only paths shaped by drifting refugees and scavengers. Leon moved on foot when necessary, by truck when he could barter a ride, and once on horseback after a band of guerrilla fighters recognized him and offered brief, wordless assistance. As he entered the mountains, snow began to fall. Not the gentle flakes of peaceful winters, but heavy, wind-driven crystals that sliced at exposed skin. The world turned white, silent except for the crunch of his boots. When he reached the coordinates, he found himself standing before a ravine carved by centuries of storms. At the bottom lay the collapsed remains of a structure. Steel girders twisted into grotesque shapes, concrete cracked open like ribs. And then he saw it. A door half buried in earth, reinforced, scarred by heat. The entrance to a hidden facility. The remnants of Seiryū. Leon descended carefully, sliding down loose gravel, testing each piece of debris before stepping on it. When he reached the door, he brushed away dirt and ice. Embedded in the frame was an emblem, a stylized dragon coiled around a circle. He inhaled sharply. The symbol from Anastasia's documents, the emblem that had marked every classified program involved in the disappearances. With effort, he forced the door open. It groaned, protesting like a waking creature. Inside, darkness waited, cold, stale, trembling with echoes of footsteps that had stopped years ago. Lian lit his lantern. The flame flickered, illuminating corridors lined with rusted railings and peeling paint. The air swelled of disinfectant, mold, and something faintly metallic. He moved deeper. Rooms branched off to either side, observation bays, tiny cells, laboratories where equipment lay scattered across the floor. Broken vials glistened like tiny mirrors. Papers were strewn everywhere, their corners burned or torn in haste. On one wall, characters had been scratched with frantic desperation. "We are not an experiment." Lian felt a hollow ache in his chest. He continued until he reached a chamber much larger than the others. In the center was a cylindrical tank cracked down the middle. Frost clung to its interior. A chair lay overturned beside it, shackles dangling. And on the floor beneath the tank was something that made Lian stop still. A telegraph receiver. Old, damaged, but recognizable. Next to it lay a sheet of paper, weighted by a rusted bolt. On it, written in shaky but unmistakable Morse, "I heard your signal." Lian's throat tightened. The person from car 11B had been here, alive, possibly freed during the final evacuation of the facility. Or perhaps they had freed themselves. He examined the room again. Symbols had been painted onto the walls. Dragons, circles, arrows pointing downward. Each arrow led to a hatch in the floor, secured by a heavy locking bar. Lian knelt and lifted the hatch. The opening opened to a narrow staircase descending into blackness. He hesitated only a moment before taking the lantern and beginning his descent. The steps creaked. The darkness felt alive, as if breathing against the lantern's glow. Minutes later, he reached the bottom. The staircase opened into a long tunnel carved into the mountain itself. The walls were reinforced with steel ribs, and wires hung overhead like veins. And at the end of the tunnel, faint and fragile, was a sound. Tap, 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 tap. He froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. It couldn't be. Not after all these years. Not down here. He followed the sound, each step slow and calculated. His boots echoed on the floor, joining the faint tapping. The tunnel curved, then opened into a chamber far larger than he expected. A cavern filled with cages, tables, machines half disassembled or smashed. And at the center, facing a wall of broken glass, was a figure. Thin, still, wrapped in a tattered coat. Their hand rested against the glass, tapping gently with a rhythm that made Lian's breath stop in his throat. He recognized it instantly. It was the same pattern that had echoed through car 11B, the same message that had haunted him for years. Witness. Lian raised his lantern slightly. "Who are you?" he whispered. The figure did not turn at first. They tapped once more, then lowered their hand and slowly faced him. Their face was gaunt, their eyes hollow yet intensely aware. There was a faint scar across their neck, as if something had been implanted and later removed. When they spoke, their voice was barely more than a rasp. "You came back." Lian swallowed. "I never stopped listening." The figure nodded, then gestured to the broken machines around them. "They thought the Empire died, but men who believe in dragons do not stop dreaming when the sky burns." Lian approached slowly. "Seiryū continues?" The figure looked down. "Fragments. Cells, offshoots in the south, scientists who refused to surrender their research, financiers who fled. They are quiet now, but quiet things grow teeth in the dark. Lian felt a hollow ache in his chest. "Why did you call me here?" The figure stepped closer, raising a trembling hand. In their palm was a tiny cylinder, metallic, sealed, no bigger than a finger. "Because the truth you carried ended an empire, and the truth I carry will stop what comes next." Lian stayed at the cylinder. "What's inside?" The figure answered with a single word: "Names." Footsteps echoed suddenly from the tunnel behind them, multiple, steady, coordinated. Lanterns flickered. Voices murmured in Japanese. Lian's pulse surged. The remnants of Seidu had returned. The figure shoved the cylinder into his hand. "Go," they whispered. "I will slow them." "You can come with me," Lian said desperately. "It's not too late." The figure shook their head. "It has always been too late for me." Their eyes held years of pain, of experiments and captivity, and a strange, quiet peace. "Witness," they said again. "One last time." The footsteps grew louder. Lian forced himself to run. He sprinted through the tunnel, lantern bouncing, shadows flickering across the walls. Behind him, a single gunshot echoed. Then another. Then silence. By the time Lian reached the